Hi, this is Lamar, and you're listening to Getting to Third Space with Lamar and Tom. A third space is a term that refers to a safe space for people to come together for respectful dialogue in a spirit of listening, sharing, and learning. In this podcast, we explore what it means to have third space conversations, and we try to model them. If you like what you hear in this podcast, please be sure to subscribe, share it, and of course, like it. The more people join us, the quicker we get to third space as a society. Now let's get to third space today.
Hey, Lamar. Happy St. Patrick's Day.
Oh, the same to you.
Oh, thank you very much. Are you wearing any green?
Nada.
No, me neither.
Not a thing.
I'm not that much into St. Patrick's Day.
I was always a kid at school that never wore the green and always forgot. And you can't run home and change, right?
Yeah, I've got hazel eyes. They aren't really green.
Oh, okay.
So no,
right.
I don't even
work.
Yeah, we of course we're both from Iowa, and the predominant population there in Iowa tends to be German or Swedish or Norwegian, right. and so we never really quite could understand. I could never quite understand what St. Patrick's Day was really all about until I got much older. So, did you?
No, not sure I still do.
Well, I think St. Patrick. What did he drive the snakes out of Ireland or something?
He drove the snakes out. That I know.
Okay.
Do you know why he did that?
Was it related to the potato famine?
It took too long to walk him out.
Oh God! All right, you've been looking up St. Patrick's Day jokes, haven't you?
I have been.
All right. Well, okay. So okay. Here it comes. Here it comes. What position do leprechauns play in baseball?
First, second, and third base.
Shortstop.
Oh, shortstop. Ooh, short jokes.
blame good housekeeping. I mean,
right. Okay. So what did one Irish ghost say to the other?
I don't know.
Top of the moaning to you.
Oh, that's bad. Okay, so why do golfers have a hard time ending their game on St. Patrick's Day?
Don't know.
They refuse to leave the green.
Got it.
Green.
Oh. So what's long and green and only shows up once a year?
I don't know.
A St. Patrick's Day parade.
Oh, here you go. How old are leprechauns?
Haven't a clue.
Old enough to remember when rainbows were black and white.
My final one for you.
Okay.
What do you call Irish spiders?
I have no idea.
Patty long legs. Patty long legs.
Patty. Okay. All right. One last one here that's a Patty
right.
joke too. All right. What does a leprechaun order at dinner? At a diner, excuse me.
At a diner?
Yeah.
Don't know.
Patty melt.
Okay. We end up with a couple of patties. We're good.
Well, anyway, so to all of our Irish friends, we do wish them a happy St. Patrick's Day. Mm-hmm. And just go out there and behave yourselves now, okay? Just behave yourselves. So
look for the rainbow.
Yeah. Well, hey, I tell you, we got another table talk today, and this one was inspired by an article we found in the New York Times.
Well, and to be fair, you found it and sent it to me and said, Lamar, you got to read this.
Well, it was a very interesting article.
Yeah.
I
agree with you. Yeah. So we're going to kind of leapfrog off of that today.
Yeah. So shall we talk about what the article was about?
We could.
Yeah.
Let me take a swig of my Colombian coffee.
Okay. All right. I've already had my Colombian coffee.
All right.
And so I am drinking Frederick water.
All right. Well,
at this
whatever
point.
works.
But um, so what do you remember about the actually, we could have fun with our listeners and just not tell them what the article was about and just start talking about it, right? I mean, that would be kind of cruel, though.
Well, yeah, that would be. Let's do this. So this article is about a woman who was at the January 6th. In my book, I would call it an insurrection. Other people would call it something different.
I would call it an insurrection too. So we're in agreement there.
Her name is Rachel Powell.
Mm-hmm.
She's 44 and is from, I believe, Pennsylvania.
Mm-hmm.
If I've got that right. And she was one of the 1,600 people who was granted a presidential pardon. Actually, one of the 1,500 people, because there's a lot of other people who were not granted pardons, but were granted the end of their sentences, basically. Yeah. But if you have heard about kind of her role, she was often called the Pink Hat Lady, or the lady with the bullhorn. There's a picture of her using kind of a mountain climber's ice axe, breaking one of the windows at the Capitol to gain entry.
Yeah.
And so she was photographed, obviously, as many were. And then at later point, she knew they were looking for her, and she went ahead and turned herself in.
Yeah.
And she was given, I think, 57 months in federal prison because she had, I think, 5 or 6 federal charges and then a whole host of misdemeanors.
And I think it's important to note, too, that actually she, on the stand, when she was on trial, she confessed.
She did.
And she said, that this was not an appropriate thing for her to do. And, she seemed to show genuine remorse for it, and that it was a pretty bad idea. And she jumped through all those kinds of hoops, right? She
did. However, that was incongruent with her social media postings at the same time, which the court did notice.
Yes.
that incongruency.
Yeah.
So she may have been coached to go that direction, I'm guessing.
Yeah.
So while in prison, she became friends with a couple of other January 6th protesters who were serving terms. I think one person was serving terms for assaulting a police officer.
Yeah.
Honestly, I don't remember what the other person was serving her term for, but they became friends and kind of while they were in there developed this, they called the J6 sisterhood, supporting each other during this time.
Yeah.
But she did get the pardon and was released from prison to go back home. And, her statements that were made and have continued to be made over time, and that she's been the center of a lot of, I think, interviews and some social media kind of posts, again, has been really all I did was break a window.
Yeah. And by the way, you referred to this earlier, and I happened to find what she said to the judge.
Okay.
She was the article says she was struggling with her composure. She apologized, saying she was deeply ashamed of her behavior. I broke a window, she said. I pushed on police barricades. I encouraged others to enter the building. My conduct was disgraceful. But then that's not what she said when she appeared on Stephen K. Bannon's War Room program, in which she, and in social media, as you mentioned, she asserted she was a victim, the police were aggressors, and her window breaking amounted to a misdemeanor and did not warrant prison time. So,
it's an interesting story and set
Yeah.
of circumstances. And if you stand back and you kind of look at this from all sides, there's a bit of logic to almost everything that you hear,
Yeah.
both from her and from the judge and others. You know, it's I can't tell you how many times in my career, and I'm sure, Tom, you've heard this as well, the minimizing that people at some point get to, who have found themselves in difficult situations. Some of people I worked with were legal situations. It was, this is all that I did. I only did this. And yet they've been treating me like this.
And I'm sure I've done that myself.
I'm sure we all do.
Yeah.
You know, honestly, Dad, I'm thinking back when I was a child. I was throwing the baseball against the side of the barn.
Yeah.
I
Didn't see that window there.
But no, seriously, I think that, you know, she definitely minimizes the impact of her role when she's not sitting in the courtroom.
Yeah.
So, and some interesting things have happened. I mean, since she's been out, I think that there's, I find it fascinating to see how communities respond to people. And some have responded very favorably to her. Others have kind of kept their distance. As I'm reading the stories. Additionally, it wasn't but just a few weeks after she was released, she tried to go get a few weeks, that's not that far from now, but she tried to go and get a what's the term?
Concealed carry.
Concealed carry permit.
Right, and a new gun. Her previous gun, by the way, was an AK-47.
That one of her guns was an AK-47.
Yeah, one of her previous guns was an AK-47.
I know that they were confiscated because her house was also part of a search warrant, and they took items from the house. And I'm guessing probably the guns went with that.
Yeah,
but she didn't know quite how to fill out the paperwork, because there's a question on there as to whether you have been convicted of a felony.
Yeah.
And among other things. And what do you do with a pardon? And that was kind of going on in her mind.
Yeah.
What do I say here? Because I was pardoned, does that mean my conviction goes away? And it shows she asked for some help there at the counter where she was filling out the forms. They had no idea.
Yeah.
She talked to the police. They had no idea. They recommended she talk to an attorney. Eventually, she filled it out as no, she has not been convicted, and they rejected her application.
Yep.
And I believe she's currently in appeal to find out why.
Yeah. You know, you said something a couple of minutes ago, and I want to loop back to about communities, because I thought that the article had they posed a really, two questions that are kind of at the heart of all of this. They acknowledge that many communities like hers have really tried to figure out what to do with the January 6th prisoners returning home. And the two questions they pose are they rioters who tried to thwart the country's sacred transfer of power, or are they patriots, as Mr. Trump and many Republicans contend, spurred to action by a righteous cause? And that's kind of the quandary, I think, that her community feels based on what we read in the article about how to respond to her. You know, is she a rioter, or is she a patriot?
Well, you know, I think it behooves us to take a little deeper look at a little deeper talk about this. So, how did she get there in the first place? How did she find herself emotionally and kind of buying into kind of the anger and the angst and the messaging to actually go and participate in that riot? in that meeting? How did she get to that point? How does a person get there? She was not a very public person or outspoken person.
But she's one of those folks, as I understand from the reporting that they did on this article, that she prior to the COVID pandemic, she was homeschooling her kids. She was doing organic gardening, and she was selling her produce, and that was kind of how she was making her living in her community there. But then the pandemic hit. She lost her livelihood. She seemed to do a much deeper dive into a lot of the conspiracy theories that were out there.
But to stop there for a second, what was tied to that was losing her livelihood was related to the COVID situation.
Yeah.
And and some of the messaging that was coming out, and I think her frustration seemed to be what she was talking about or reporting, that her livelihood was based off of misinformation that they were making decisions, that the government was making decisions about, that cost her livelihood.
Yeah, right. She blamed the government for that.
Yeah.
And in doing that, I think that was probably the crack open in the door to allow her to begin to investigate some other things, including the idea, that are really demonstrated lies that the 2020 election was stolen, and she really went down that rabbit hole. And so by the time January 6th came around, she was one of those folks that was convinced that she was showing up there to help save the country.
So I think we're both in agreement about the misinformation about COVID. We've talked about that. I think we both feel that the January 6th was a riot and an insurrection.
Right.
But when I look at somebody's path to get where they got to, I find it interesting, and in a sense that it's easy for me to say, you knew better than to make these decisions.
Right.
However, when you get to the point where you can't take care of your family, when you don't have the resources that you once had available, and the messaging you're hearing around you take you down that rabbit hole, it's easy to go down the rabbit hole, and because you're starting to look for somebody to blame, because it can't be me. She did nothing that made the pandemic become a pandemic. As an individual, one person,
right?
I mean, that's another conversation maybe, but she didn't do, as far as we could tell, anything to limit her business being successful. I believe she also had a second job at like a bookstore.
Yeah.
But she ended up leaving that job because of people's reactions to her.
Well, she did when she came back home.
Yeah, that's right.
But prior to that, I mean, of course, COVID was shutting everything down. So the bookstore was probably shutting down, or at least taking some, changing some hours and things like that. And then, of course, things were just shutting down like crazy for a while there. And so I think part of perhaps, Lamar, what you're suggesting here is that we can extend some grace to her for making the choices that she did around, because her family, she has 8 kids. She's a single mom, and she made some tough choices. And she made the best choice that she knew how to make in that situation, albeit it was a very poor choice. And so we can perhaps offer, is that what you're suggesting, that we can offer some grace to her because she was in an untenable situation and she she made the best choice she could, even though it was really not a good choice.
Well, yeah, and I'm not sure I would. Yeah, maybe that's the right word to use in some cases. I find it fascinating to try to understand human behavior.
Mm-hmm.
We've talked about this before a little bit, and that is what motivates people to do what they do,
Mm-hmm.
what motivates people to believe what they believe.
Mm-hmm.
And I think what has polarized us has been that we have failed to try to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Rather, we have said you're wrong and I'm right. And it's kind of like when we were talking with Heidi and
Heidi and Guy?
Guy.
Yeah.
Where a guy was talking about, kind of this, we get to the fight response very quickly. This is mine. No, it's mine. And it's not yours. It's mine. No, it's not yours. It's mine. And so we'll fight for it.
Yeah.
But we don't really try to get a bigger picture and understand really what the situation is, who's experiencing what. And here's where I think the whole communication, let me take it back, the whole information rabbit holes go and how powerful they are. When I'm upset, I can sit here and be very upset with what's going on with Donald Trump and these tariffs. We talked about that a little bit. And by the way, time-wise, from when we recorded this, they went into effect today. I can get on my social media, and I can find everything that agrees and reinforces that I should be angry, and who I should be angry at, and why I should be angry. It's the algorithms pull me that way. My own bias pulls me that way.
Mm-hmm.
So I can understand why someone who feels their life has fallen apart looks for someone to blame, and in doing so finds a welcoming community with a message that says, this is who you blame, and this is the problem. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I mean, I think that all of us are really susceptible. And we've talked about this before, why it's really, really important to check and double check and sometimes triple check what you're hearing. Because you may be getting false information, but you also may be getting information that is just so appalling that it's accurate, but it is so appalling that it spurs you to some kind of response or action. And we could be susceptible both ways. I mean, some things are happening that are so bad that it just touches you at a really visceral level. And so you have a very visceral reaction to it, whether that's anger or compassion or, by God, I got to go out there and do something right now. That's understandable. That's understandable. I think in this case, what we know about her situation is that she was responding to false information. She was responding to, well, actually, let me walk that back a second.
Okay.
Some of it was real. What was real was that she was in a very difficult spot because of what was happening with COVID and the pandemic and all of that. And so that's a very real, difficult place to be in. I mean, all of us felt that punch, right? At the time that was happening. But then she found herself ingesting information that was not correct, that was false, and that just kind of fed some of that visceral reaction she was having to, what do I do under this circumstance that feels so very dire to me? I have 8 kids to feed. I'm here by myself. What do I do?
I totally agree. I'm with you. Something that you were saying about finding yourself in these situations, something that bothers me quite a bit. It's kind of this the tendency that we can have sometimes to dehumanize people.
Mm-hmm.
Some could say, you got yourself in this mess.
Right.
Some would say, you made bad choices. What are you thinking with the family of 8? And just being very critical, finding, trying to do your own homeschooling. Of course, you're only going to get a small perspective.
Right.
We could go down that list. And for me, I think about that as being a way to dehumanize people.
Right.
You put them in a category, you call them something, and people have come up with lots of derogatory names to describe each other.
Right.
Whether it's a situation that we've just described, or whether it's a college degreed family in the in a high income bracket, we can dehumanize that as well.
Yeah.
One of the things I dislike about what I feel happens when we're in these difficult situations that we're in right now, I mean, this is just one of those pieces of the puzzle, is we tend to see people as them or us.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And when it's them, we dehumanize them.
Yeah. When
it's us, we can be friends.
The situation that she was in with her kids was very, very dire. I understand that. A lot of people find themselves in those situations. And quite honestly, you and I both know each other well enough to know that we have both been in those situations.
Yes.
Where we didn't know where the next meal was coming from for our family. We didn't know if we'd be able to make rent or make the house payment, at the end of the month. We are both middle class folks, but we weren't always. We were just kind of hanging on at different times in our lives, right?
Right. That's right.
But we didn't resort to anything like this. Oh, at least I didn't. I don't know about you. I mean, but you know what I'm saying? We didn't. So there's that. Yes, this is a thing that happens for people, and it's very, very hard. But it doesn't have to lead to a series of really bad choices like she made. Is there therefore then some level of responsibility, personal responsibility there?
Oh, I'm glad you brought that up, but because please don't take what I'm suggesting as people are not responsible.
Mm-hmm.
I do believe people are responsible for their actions and the choices that they make, and should be held responsible in certain cases in certain ways. Mm-hmm. When I was working at the college, and sometimes you had to deal with behavior, right? And you tried to be as creative and impactful as you can in positive ways. But we would deal with one situation this way. Something came up that was kind of like that, but you dealt with it another way. And someone would say, Lamar, you're not being consistent. And I would say, one of my problems is I'm consistently inconsistent, because I find that it is trying to understand what causes people to make the decisions they make is often how you begin to help and intervene if that's your role.
That's right.
So a grid doesn't help me in trying to
right.
So the grid or even the court system doesn't help in a lot of cases,
because they're trying to apply the same standard across multiple cases that are very, very, maybe the circumstances are very, very different. And I don't fault the law for that. I mean, there has to be, I mean, that's what the rule of law is, that there is a law and it has to be applied. It has to be applied as fairly as possible. And at the same time, there are there are different circumstances that push people. I mean, some people would be pushed to desperation, desperate acts, as I think she was. Other people in the same situation wouldn't be pushed to desperate acts.
Yeah.
I'm not exactly sure what the difference is there. Why it happens in one person's case or another, but there has to be some flexibility in there whenever possible. And in your situation in the college, that made all the sense in the world, especially given that some of those behaviors might not really have been illegal, but they were probably highly problematic socially.
That's true. Yeah.
But if they were illegal, then there's a slightly different standard, I think, that comes into play.
Right.
It's the rule of law at that point.
But even the rule of law, and if you read this particular case and some other cases, the judges took into account the exceptionalities.
Right. They did.
And so there wasn't a matrix that was applied across the board to all those who participated.
And that's why then when we go and we look at her behavior on J6, she says, I broke a window, I pushed on police barricades, I encouraged others to enter the building.
Right.
I mean, that's more than being a passive onlooker. Especially, they had a photo of her in her pink stocking hat, raising the ice pick or ice axe.
It was axe, yeah.
Yeah, to break the window.
Yep.
That's not being a passive onlooker.
So let's take this another step.
Yep.
So we kind of done a little bit of a deeper dive into other factors in this particular case.
Yep.
And this is an example of what could be maybe made in a lot of other cases. What do you think? How do you feel, or what do you believe about the choice and the choice to pardon, and the pardons that came down the pike? Not just pardons. I mean, there was also the commuting of sentences in some cases.
Yeah.
So what are your thoughts about that? If you think in this broader sense of not every case is the same.
Well, I think anytime you sign a sweeping order that pardons 1,600 people all at once, there's no good thought that's gotten into it. I see this as purely politically motivated.
Okay.
That's why Trump did it. He was angry. He was upset. He pardoned even some of the most violent people that were responsible for the deaths of Capitol Police.
Tom, do you think that those who were convicted of violence, were they part of those that had their sentence commuted, or were they part of those who were pardoned? Because to me, there's distinction there.
I think they were. I think the sentences were commuted, if I remember right.
I think so too.
Yeah.
But your point still stands.
Yeah.
That you were making, and I would agree with that, I guess. So if you look back, there's been a lot of pardons over the years. And by the way, just in our little time that we've had to do some Googling, we've learned that there's more than one kind of pardon. There's partial pardons and there's conditional pardons. This was an unconditional pardon.
Yeah.
Didn't have conditions to it. But there have been a lot of presidents who have pardoned people. Do you think that they pardoned people, that their pardons, the other presidents, when they pardoned people, that they weren't political in nature?
Oh no, I think many times pardons are in fact political in nature.
I think that's the name of that.
Yeah, that's pretty much the name of that game. Most definitely. And of course, President Biden did some sweeping pardons. And by the way, I do not agree with his pardons either.
Okay.
I'm probably less familiar with them than I am perhaps Trump's, because Trump's have really been in the news quite a bit. But I remember when they were talking about, he was thinking about doing these sweeping pardons and these preemptive pardons. I'm not sure I agreed with that, because it could be argued that his actions actually set up the precedent for Trump to do what he did. And so I think that because there's so many other ways to deal with this kind of stuff. I mean, taking a lesson from the Trump playbook, you can keep it tied up in courts forever, right?
Sure.
And so I think it's unfortunate when people who don't have the means to pay for their legal defense get caught up in that. But that's, there are other remedies beyond pardons and commutation of sentences and such as that. So,
well, let's think about some that have happened. Do you remember who Jimmy Carter pardoned?
No. Who did he pardon?
His brother?
Oh, yeah. I think maybe, yeah. Billy?
I think he pardoned Billy.
Yeah.
He also commuted the sentence of Patty Hearst.
Mm-hmm.
And then Clinton actually gave a full pardon for Patty Hearst then.
Mm-hmm.
Which I always thought was kind of an interesting one, because that's a unique story.
Yeah.
The Patty Hearst story. If the listeners don't know that, it might be one they want to go back and kind of review. And she was a kidnapped captive who became active in a terrorist organization.
I think it was one of the earliest cases of what came to be known as Stockholm syndrome.
Stockholm syndrome, correct?
Yeah.
I think it's fascinating to go back and just look at some of the pardons. Lincoln pardoned, persons in the Civil War era. You can go back and there is some of it is to repair relationships and repair, the country and divisiveness, and I get that.
Yeah.
I think, though, what's really stands out different to me about this is that this was such a 180-degree difference from where I believe what the polls are telling us is where the majority of the U.S. citizenship is at.
That's right.
And feels like in a sense, either a betrayal or the beginning of all of the things that we're worried that might be happening.
Yeah.
I worry about particularly those who were on the side of the violence, those who were actually planning the insurrection, whether they were on site or not on site.
Yeah,
because that means that still is a possibility of happening, and could have happened in prison as well. But I worry about that putting us all back in harm's way.
Yeah, and I'm worried about. I worry about the Capitol Police that were injured and damaged and even killed by the rioters. And I'm trying to understand where the justice is for them. These were people that were simply doing their jobs. Some of them were Trump supporters themselves, but they were doing their jobs, and they were trying to protect the Capitol that day. And I find myself wondering, where is the justice for them in this? I remember watching that happen live on television, and I had actually just had an eye appointment, and I was coming out, and the television was on, and I was watching it, and I turned on the radio and listened to it on the way home, and it was stunning what I was listening to, what I then, went in the house and I turned on the TV and watched. I mean, what we cannot get away from is that there were millions of eyewitnesses to that. It wasn't a tourist group going into the Capitol like some way out of touch folks have been suggesting. It was a very violent and frightening day, and the last place I would have wanted to been was as a Capitol police officer in that mess.
So let me step back a little bit from that, because
Okay.
I saw the same things.
Yeah.
Okay. I saw the news clips.
Yeah.
But I wasn't there.
Right.
And I remember the day you took me on a tour of that place, and it was really bitterly cold. I don't know if you remember that, but we walked through them all.
Probably.
Yeah. Oh.
Best time to go there is in the winter.
That's right. No, nobody's there.
Nobody's there.
But I remember being impressed with two things. One is how everything kind of was orchestrated. Not orchestrated is the wrong word. Built in such a way as it all kind of fit, I thought, really well together. But then I was also impressed with how big it was, how much space there was. So I'll be honest with you, a friend of mine was there.
Yeah.
And he told me afterwards, he goes, Lamar, says, I was there, and I didn't see any of that.
Mm-hmm.
I was at the rally. I heard the president speak.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't go with the crowd, and I didn't ask what else this person was doing. But I didn't go from the speech area, to the Capitol. And so what that person is reporting is what they truly experienced.
Mm-hmm.
Then they would have had to see what you and I saw on television.
Yeah.
And I get that. So I can see why some people are saying that's not at all.
It's not what happened. Yeah.
Not what happened. I didn't see it. I wasn't experiencing that. I saw it on TV. Well, then you can go down those rabbit holes of saying, yeah, it's kind of like the moon landing. That was all staged, but that we're not going to get into that. I don't want to go down that rabbit hole, but I understand why some would honestly feel that way.
Yeah,
because they honestly didn't see it.
I can too, but then hopefully they would have gone back and they would have watched the tape, and they would have hopefully not gone down the rabbit hole of, this was all done with AI or whatever.
I know.
Yeah, I don't know that they would have, but
that people were responding to aggressive police officers.
Yeah, but I don't want to get too far down this particular rabbit hole ourselves, because I think there's another conversation to be had here in the time that we have remaining.
Let's talk about that.
About how does a community respond to somebody like this woman? I mean, this is really what the heart of the article is about, was the conundrum of the community about how to respond to her. Do they see her as a rioter? Do they see her as a patriot? Do they welcome her back with open arms? Do they keep her at arm's distance from her? Wow. I mean, so both of us have been in the business of grace, right? I mean, we have these ministerial backgrounds, and the other side of grace is if there is accountability, in that, the grace can be extended, but sometimes there is also a sense of accountability that has to take place. I don't want to go all Calvinist here, because I'm not a Calvinist. But
I'll use Dietrich Bonhoeffer as kind of an example where he talked about grace. Grace isn't cheap.
Right, it isn't cheap.
And I do agree with that. Like I said earlier in the podcast, I do believe there are consequences for the choices we make, and we have to pay those consequences.
Right.
And if I make a bad choice that breaks a law or does something else, I mean, regardless of where my heart is or how I got to that point, I still have responsibility to address it.
Yeah.
So yeah, when your point though about how does a community respond to people in their community who's been part of this?
Yeah.
I do tend to fall on, I think, on the side of staying in relationship with that person.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to use that phrase versus grace, to be honest with you, because I'm not sure it's up to me to dole out grace and those kinds of things. It's kind of a fuzzy word in a lot of ways. For me, it's to care for somebody in my community, to treat people with respect and try to understand and stay in a relationship. Isn't that what we've been talking about for 2 years?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I wouldn't disagree with that. I think it is important to try to stay in relationship with them. I don't want to say it becomes hard. I want to say it becomes challenging.
Yeah.
In the case, for example, with this woman where she is continuing to go down the rabbit hole of 2020 election, was stolen, and appearing on various podcasts and that, which she's, talking. Now she's saying, well, all I did was break a window. It should have been just a misdemeanor. So I think it becomes challenging because I agree that staying in relationship is really important. Is there a point at which staying in relationship becomes a sanctioning of some of the other behavior that's still problematic? And especially if she rearms herself again,
Well, but to be fair, she didn't use a firearm in her situation.
She didn't.
But I'll give you an example. I go see a particular clinician for something that, kind of a physical health well-being thing. And I have intentionally avoided having political conversations with this person. This person has intentionally not avoided having political conversations with me. and
I hope it's not a dentist, because they have an advantage. You just stuff stuff in your mouth and you can't say anything, and they just talk at you.
It's not.
Oh, good.
But and I find this almost comical. But this person believes that I am so far to one end where he's at that he talks to me just like I'm in 100% agreement with everything he's saying, and I'm not at all. But I'm not choosing. I'm choosing to stay at a certain level of relationship with the person, and I find that to be healthy. But on the other side of that, if my relationship was one that needed to grow or was growing or had grown, I think it's up to me to use the techniques of third space that we've talked about, of communication, of listening and understanding and learning, to be able to have and build that conversation with that person so that they do know where I'm at and that I understand where they're at. And we have an opportunity together to figure out, what we need to learn and understand from each other.
Do you see that as a possibility? Would that include the possibility of somehow influencing how this person sees things?
Oh, absolutely.
Here's the risk. Go ahead. I'm wondering if in the case of this woman in the article, where are those people in her little town in Pennsylvania that would establish relationship with her, really with the hope of helping her avoid getting into a situation like she did on January 6, 2021? Uh, it looks like she's, according to the article, she is continuing to surround herself with people that think very much like she does. And so, how does one, I remember the comment she made after getting her hair cut. And she told the hairdresser, I just want you to know that this haircut is magnificent.
Yeah, right.
And it's like, okay, I mean, it seems like here's a person that's a little challenging to really engage.
Well, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And we may not.
Right.
We may not. The risk that you have in staying in a relationship is in learning and listening and trying to understand is it may change you too.
That's right. Yeah. I would expect that in doing so, you will hear some things that you hadn't thought about before, and you may come away with a slightly different perspective. But I think that when people hold certain values pretty dear, if those are really good values, if they're solid values, if they are, well, no, I shouldn't say that, good or solid, because some people would have very different values from me, and they would say, well, they're good values because I hold on to them. So I don't really want to say that. I think that if they are genuinely deeply felt values, they're not going to change appreciably, whether they're good, bad, or otherwise. If they're deeply felt, they're probably not going to change much. And there might come a point where you have to simply agree to be in a relationship, but not agree on the values with the person.
So when you get to that point, what do you have left when you don't agree on those particular issues?
Hopefully what you have left is a simple, kind relationship and respectful relationship.
And that is the basis of a healthy relationship. Although it doesn't have to be simple.
Mm-hmm.
It can be complex still.
Yeah.
The way I would view it. But if I can still respect people, if I can still enjoy being with people, if I can still hold to what I feel are important values and beliefs for me in the face of a relationship where those may not agree, but we have so many other things that we do agree on. To me, this is the way to begin to attack the whole polarization issue. Because we have decided, or we've been told, or we've been led, or whatever you want to say, to dehumanize. I'm going to go back to that thought again. Dehumanize those who don't agree with us or don't have the lifestyle or perspective that we have to such a degree that we want nothing to do with them.
Yeah, another term that comes to mind for me on that is, and I think we've maybe referred to this before, that dehumanization is sometimes people will refer to it as being othered.
Yeah,
as well. That if you can put them in this category of being an other, as opposed to simply being like ourselves or human like ourselves, then it's easier then to dismiss them and have nothing to do with them.
Right. Now, the danger is the wrong word. The as people can tell, we really try to pick our words carefully, right? Because words mean something.
Yeah.
The challenge, or I think an important thing for us to remember is that if we believe that people are important to us, relationships are important to us, communities are important to us, if we believe that these things are true, then I think that's where we can draw the motivation we need to step outside of where our biases are at. Biases are not a bad thing. They're just, they're things. Step out of where our biases are at and be willing to meet somebody in their space.
Yeah.
I am not, you know me, my background is I haven't, I wasn't the guy in college that spent all of his, life partying all the time, then tried to show up for class. That just wasn't who I was. I didn't spend time there, but there are times where I found myself in those situations relating to people and learning from them and caring for them.
Mm-hmm.
But it doesn't mean that I have to buy in to the whole scene.
Yeah, that's right.
And I think that's really important. If we really believe that communities and relationships are important, we don't let a voice from Washington tell us these people are bad, these people are good.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. No matter which party they're coming from, right?
Absolutely.
Nope.
Absolutely. And it comes from multiple directions.
Yeah.
So that's my little stump speech for today.
Well, that's pretty good. That's pretty good. And, of course, where it gets really dicey is when we begin to talk about professional football.
Yep.
And
well, you and I have not talked about the Super Bowl, have we?
We haven't talked about professional football or the Super Bowl, but we can do that in the future. But
okay.
We're kind of out of time for today. But yeah, I'm glad we took some time to kind of process this this article, because it was an interesting article, and in fact, the links will be in the show notes.
Oh, good.
As well as some of the articles that we found, including the one you found from the White House about that, the declaration about granting,
right,
the pardons, if people haven't seen that. So, yeah, I tell you, the one thing I don't think we mentioned this, that getting or did we mention that just because you have a pardon, it doesn't mean that your record is cleaned up, right?
Oh, no, we hadn't talked about that on the show. We talked about it beforehand. Yeah.
Yeah, and that might be part of the
learning.
Yeah, part of the challenge that she's facing in getting a gun at this point is because even a presidential pardon doesn't mean that your record is expunged.
That's correct.
Or erased. Yeah.
And also, even though federal law typically trumps state law. Yeah. That's not always the case how it plays out.
Yeah.
And gun laws are one of those things.
Yeah.
That it might be, there could be a number of factors that's going on. And she may, in fact, eventually be able to get that.
Yeah.
So we'll see.
But she's going to have to go through an appeal process. So.
Yep. All right.
Well, hey, Lamar, it's good to see you. And
good
again,
to see you.
Happy St. Patrick's Day. So
you as well. Have a good stroll out in the patio and
yeah, out into the patio.
Enjoy a cup of Joe.
Yeah, absolutely. Why not?
All
Why
right.
not?
Okay.
All right. You take care.
You as well, my friend.
See you soon.
Bye.
Tom here. Thank you for listening to Getting to Third Space with Lamar and Tom. Remember to click on subscribe to get notices about new episodes, and be sure to like and share the podcast as well. Opinions and ideas expressed in this podcast are solely those of Lamar Roth and Tom Klaus, and we'd like to hear your opinions and ideas too. You can leave us a voice message on Spotify, or you can email us at the addresses found in the show notes. Also, in the show notes, you can find links to some of the things we talked about today, so you can check them out yourself. Until next time, keep moving forward toward third space.